Bridget. You may have watched my first video on what it was like for me to have my tonsils removed. My first video talked a little bit about how I prepared, why I had my tonsils removed, and then what the day of the procedure was actually like. The second part of this video then is going to talk a little bit about after I woke up from surgery and then how the rest of my recovery process went. So for those of you that haven't watched my first video, I was 26 years old when I got my tonsils removed. I had fairly small tonsils, but they had lots of crevices in them, which caused a lot of food and particles to get stuck in them, and I would get something which is called tonsil stones, and they're kind of, if you don't know what they are, they're these gross, I would say little like deposits of food and saliva that stink, and they just get stuck in your throat, and then basically it causes swelling, and so that's why I had my tonsils removed. But so after I had my procedure, I woke up and I remember that I felt like, and this might be a weird thing to describe, but I remember like pulling myself out of the anesthesia. And I actually even kind of scared the nurse a little bit that was in the room, because I guess I woke up really quickly compared to what normal people wake up from anesthesia. And so like when I woke up, she turned around and said like, "Oh wow, you're awake." Because they just brought me back from surgery. And so I remember I could feel myself pulling myself out of that anesthesia and just like waking up. And the first thing that I wanted when I woke up was water or ice. And so she brought me a whole bunch of ice chips, and I remember I was just so thirsty. And I think part of it is because I had it in my mind that I was going to make sure that I stayed hydrated, that my throat was always wet, because I wanted to heal as quickly as possible, and I wanted to make sure that I was not going to have bleeding. And so I was just constantly downing ice. And then they asked if I wanted a popsicle, and they gave me a popsicle, and I remember I was just, eating those. And so they wheeled me back to from the recovery room back to my original room where my family was. And because I woke up so early, I had to actually stay there and wait for them to monitor me. They'll make sure that you don't start bleeding again, and that you're good to go. So I had to stay there for probably about an hour after I woke up, making sure that I had no bleeding, that I was doing okay, that I was coherent, nothing was wrong. And then after that, I was able to get dressed. I felt fine enough to get dressed myself. I didn't need a nurse. So I was able to get dressed myself, and then I walked from the recovery room to the car. So I felt fine enough to walk. And actually, when you wake up, you feel surprisingly well. And that's something that I knew and I expected, just because you're on all of that medication and all of that anesthesia and stuff that they give you. And so you think like, oh wow, this isn't that bad. And so the first day, I highly recommend, I'm not saying go crazy with what you eat, like still drink a lot, still do everything that you are thinking that you should do, but enjoy it and eat as much as you can in terms of not making yourself sick, but get food in you, because you are going to feel well enough to eat, or at least you should feel well enough to eat. And so do it now, because in the future you're not going to want to. A few things that they told me though is that I was not allowed to shower for 24 hours because of the heat. That could cause the bleeding again. And then they sent me home with a bottle of very strong liquid pain medication, as well as chapstick for drying out your lips. But I went home, I ate eggs, was the first thing that I ate. And again, I was just drinking lots and lots of water. I was able to talk, no problem. I mean, it was a little quiet, but I was able to talk. I didn't have very much pain. And actually at the time we were in the process of moving, and I was living with my mother-in-law, and she was shocked at the fact that I was walking, that I was talking, that I was eating, because again, you think of this really painful surgery and you don't think people will be coming out of it pretty decent. And so, like I said, take it easy, but enjoy the way you feel, because that's the best you're probably going to feel for quite a while. And so I ate, I had eggs, I had, I think, some applesauce, some Jell-O, a couple popsicles, again, drinking lots of liquid, and then I just relaxed the rest of the day. I watched TV, I had my humidifier running constantly, and that is something that I highly recommend, is running that humidifier. It got to the point that there was water on the windows, on the walls, but I had that thing running at full blast, and it was right next to me because I wanted to make sure that my throat stayed as moist as it possibly could, because if your throat dries out, that's where the pain comes from, and that's where you risk the chance of your scabs cracking and rebleeding. And if you start bleeding again, you go back to the doctor, they recauterize you, and then you start your recovery process all over again. So it is not worth it. You have to push through it. But the first day isn't bad. I slept with pillows so that I was elevated. You're not going to want to sleep on a side just because you are swollen and you do have a little bit of pain. Something else that I used that was really helpful, when you get your wisdom teeth removed, you get that thing that you put ice packs in and it sits around your face. I had one of those, and I had it around my neck. That helps with the swelling, and again, it numbs it so that it helps with the pain as well. And that was something that really, really helped. So the thing that I did, and my recovery, I can't say I remember like much specifically from day to day because it was 8 months ago, but things that I did that I definitely think helped with my recovery process is I drank as much as I could, but I drank it every single hour. So I would set an alarm literally every hour on my phone for 24 hours every day and have those timers go off. And I would wake up if I was sleeping or if I was napping, and I would drink. And I think that really helped with the recovery process. And I think it definitely helped with the fact that I was able to get through it with a decent amount of pain instead of like a lot of pain from what I've heard people saying. And so I know you're thinking like, I'm not waking up every hour. It isn't worth the amount of pain that you wake up with. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's not worth the pain that you have by sleeping an extra couple hours. Same thing with your medicine. They give you, I think mine was every 4 to 6 hours. I was consistent with every 4, making sure that I took it. And then I said, like, you know, if I need to, I can start stretching it out. But for the first week, I was every 4 hours taking that medicine every single 4 hours. I didn't miss it much at all, because if you get behind on your pain meds, that's when you're really going to regret it, and it's so much harder to play catch up. So you need to make sure you wake up in the middle of the night. If you're not going to do it for water, you have to do it for your medicine. And so the second day I woke up, still wasn't that bad. The pain was manageable. I was still, again, running that the humidifier, drinking that medication every 4 hours, drinking water consistently. I was able to eat eggs again. I'll tell you though, it was not as easy as the first day. It was a little bit harder, but it was manageable. It was probably like a mild case of strep, is what it felt like, but it was definitely manageable. Again, just lots of resting. I didn't shower yet at this point. I remember I tried to go take a shower, and I was very weak and lightheaded to the point that I thought I was going to pass out. So I immediately got out of the shower and just said, forget it. It wasn't worth it. And so I decided to just skip it for that day. But again, just lots of relaxing, watching TV, drinking, staying up with my medicine. Day 3 got a little bit tougher for me. That's when the pain kind of started to kick in, and it makes sense because the anesthesia and all those medications are getting out of your system, and so you do start to feel it a little bit more, and that kind of, it just went in waves. And the thing about getting your tonsils out is there's really no rhyme or reason of how you feel good one day and then crappy the next, and it just fluctuates, and that's kind of different for every person. Like, I remember day 3 and 4 wasn't that great. It was still pretty manageable, but it was really tough in terms of, that was when I was really tired. I was sleeping a little bit more, so I would go 2-3 hours without drinking water in my sleep, and then I would wake up and it would be the most painful thing that I can remember. And honestly, I can still remember that pain of waking up and you trying to swallow for the first time, and it wasn't worth it to me. So I made sure from that point on, I would just wake up all the time to take my pain medication. By day 3 and 4, I was not talking at all. It hurt too much to talk. My voice was too raspy, and it just wasn't worth it. So I just stopped talking altogether. With the pain medication, the taste isn't terrible. It's definitely not as bad as what I thought it was. Later on, I started to switch to liquid Tylenol. And that stuff tasted way worse than the stuff that they gave me at the doctor's office. The thing though that I remember about it is it has like a minty, I don't want to say a minty because it doesn't taste good like a mint, but it has some sort of like minty acidic taste to it a little bit. And so when I would wake up in the middle of the night and I went 2-3 hours without water and it was time to drink it, when I drank it, it just burned the inside of my throat astronomically. And so that was definitely, it was tough because those days 3 and day 4 was hard because I was sleeping more, I wasn't drinking as much, I was still running the humidifier, still using ice packs, but it just wasn't helping as much as what it was in day 1 and day 2. Something else is that obviously you are all scabbed back there, so I highly recommend don't looking. You can Google pictures if you want, but I will tell you that it is not pretty. Basically, it's all white, it's all scabbed over, but when you have this procedure done, I don't recommend looking. Also, for me personally, I couldn't open my mouth and stick out. I could open my mouth, but sticking my tongue out to see inside of my throat was not something that I wanted. It was not feeling up to. I was so sore back there that it just wasn't, something I was interested in, because if you stick your tongue out, you use your throat muscles. And so I just didn't look for the first week until my scab started to falling off. And even at that point, I had a really hard time looking back there. Like I couldn't get my mouth opened and get my tongue out of the way to see because I didn't have the throat muscles to be able to do that. But so like I said, day 3 and day 4 were a little rough. Day 5 wasn't, like it kind of got a little bit better. And you'll notice this is that you'll have a couple bad days and then it'll get better, but it will get worse again because of the way that your throat just recovers. Usually your scabs will start to fall off, and when your scabs start to fall off, that's when it starts to hurt again because you have the fresh skin and your scabs are all starting to break away, and that's not something that's really easy to do. You don't want to force them, so let them fall off naturally. I will say that almost all of my scabs, and this was something I was really worried about, was the scabs falling off because of the rebleeding, and just the fact that you're thinking, ooh, I'm swallowing scabs. But overall, I will say that it wasn't that bad. Like I really couldn't tell that they were falling off. I think I had very minimal that I actually kind of like was able to spit out. Most of them I swallowed, but again, I think it's because I was drinking so much. At this point, I wasn't eating as much as I was the first couple of days just because nothing really didn't hurt to eat. As I mentioned, I ate applesauce and Jell-O and those types of things. By day 5 and 6, it just burned to eat all of that. And so I was not eating Jell-O, I was not eating applesauce, I couldn't get eggs to go down, and so I had broth of soup, but you want to make sure that it is not hot. And I should say with the water, I started off with ice cold water just because it would keep it numb and keep it cold, but that got to the point that it was too sensitive back there, so I had to go to just cold water, but not ice cold water. And so your throat's going to change throughout the process. And so again, like I said, what works one day may not work another. But what was really the toughest part, I would say, is when the scab started falling off, I was constantly coughing. And the biggest thing that you don't want to do when you have your tonsils removed is coughing or sneezing, because think about when you cough or sneeze, your throat muscles kind of tighten, and if they tighten, then you can start bleeding and you're sore back there, and you just don't want to do that. But I think it was kind of like my body's way of trying to get rid of the tonsils and saying something's back here, or the tonsil scabs, I should say, the tonsils were gone. But it was kind of my body's way of probably saying these shouldn't be here, we need to get rid of them. But it was just so painful of the constant, and it was constant coughing. I would drink, I would use throat lozenges, and that's something else I recommend is find a throat lozenger that you really like. I really like the Hall's Breezers. They kind of have like a numminess to them, and they taste really good, and so I was constantly eating those as well. But it just was not helping. It was just constant coughing for like 2 days. Especially at night, it got really bad. And so that was probably the worst part. But then after that, my tonsils were starting to fall off. And so the pain didn't hurt as much. I was still taking my medicine by, day 6 and 7. I was still taking it every 4 hours. I was still drinking constantly. I was still using a humidifier. I wasn't using ice packs as much because the pain was pretty bearable. What I noticed by day like 6 and 7 is that the pain would be worse after I woke up, and that makes sense because again, you're not drinking, you're not swallowing, but it was kind of bearable throughout the day, and so I could go back to, I wasn't moving around by any means. I was able to shower, but I couldn't take long showers because I was still getting really lightheaded. And so I had to make sure that I just took quick showers. I would recommend, if you're a bath person, a bath is probably the way to go. But in that regards, I was kind of on the upswing. Things I remember though is that I still couldn't eat very much. Like I remember at this point, you will be starving. You will want just real food. And I'm not even talking like a burger. I'm talking about just food with substance. And I just couldn't eat much of anything. Like I remember I had a soup with like noodles and stuff, and I had a harder time eating it. And so you kind of get frustrated because you just want real food. You're uncomfortable, you're in pain. But just keep in mind, it does get better. And I know you hear that and you'll be reading it or you'll be watching a video. And I watched other people's videos to see like what their progress was like and thinking, okay, they got through this, I can get through that. But like the day 6, 7, 8-ish was definitely the worst for me in terms of pain. And then, like I said, after that, the pain really went down, but I was still taking my medicine. And I couldn't eat very much. So, you know, you just really have to think about over the process, you're not going to be able to do much except the fact that you are taking a week to 2 weeks off from work. I highly recommend at least a week and a half. I think what also helped with my recovery is knowing the fact I did not have to go back to work, that I could recover as slowly as I needed to, but I think that helps speed up my recovery process. If I knew I had to go back to work, I knew that I would not have recovered as quickly. And I remember by the week point, I was doing pretty decently. And the reason why I remember that is because my surgery actually got bumped up a week. And so I remember, thinking this would be when I would just be starting this process. And I'm actually almost to the point of being on the upswing. So I remember it was a week of hell, essentially. And then it was about another half week of just recovering after that. So I'd say it was for me about a week and a half. And that in terms of recovery, I think was pretty quick. Also though, I think I did a lot of things to really help try to recover as quickly as possible. By a week and a half, I started to stretch out my pain medication, maybe even a little after a week, where I would go maybe 5 hours, 5.5 or 6 hours of using that medicine, because a concern is that it's a very strong pain medication. And so you don't want to be, relying on it constantly. I will say at like a week and a half, I tried to switch to Tylenol liquid and it did not work and it was not nearly as effective. So I switched back to my prescribed medication. But the minute I started to feel the pain, if I was going 4.5 hours and I felt it at 4.5, I took it because I did not want to go back to relapsing with that pain. And so while I was trying to stretch it out, I didn't just ignore the fact of my symptoms if I was hurting. I used almost the entire bottle. I had maybe that much left in the bottle. And so I definitely would make sure that you're not overusing it, because that stuff does not get re-prescribed. And then you do have to stick with liquid Tylenol. And even at like the week and a half mark, I got to the point where I was using it, but maybe just once or twice a day. And then it was kind of just working through the existence of the day. So just make sure that you're not overusing it, because if you use it all, you're not going to get more, and then you're just going to have to kind of bear through it. Even after a week and a half, I remember we were moving into a new house and we were renovating, and even a couple weeks after the surgery, you're still tired. I mean, your body went through a traumatic experience and a surgery, and so you're not going to be up and running again even when you go back to work. So just keep that in mind, that, you know, when you go back to work, you're still going to have to take it easy. You still need to drink lots of water. You still need to sleep with a humidifier for a while overnight. Your throat does dry out and stuff, and so you just want to make sure that, you know, you're keeping it moist for a while. I will tell you, like I said, I had my surgery 8 months ago. It is something that I didn't regret it even 2 weeks after my surgery. I think even a week after my surgery, I didn't regret having it. But now, I don't think I really realized until I was ready to go back to work with teaching in August. So 3 months later, that how much I appreciated the fact that I had the surgery. Going August, September, October, November with no sore throats, none of my raspiness from talking, not that metallic taste, not that feeling of having stuff stuck in your tonsils was amazing. And now I'm 8 months past having my tonsils out. I've been sick once this year, and it was a very mild sore throat. So you will still get sore throats, but it was very, very mild. Nothing that kept me down for the count. And I just feel like I have so much more energy because my body's not constantly fighting infections and I'm not going to the doctors all the time. So it is something that I absolutely do not regret having done. I'm so glad that I did it. I wish, in all honesty, that I had it done sooner. But when you do get the surgery, it's tough. It's not something that I would ever want to do again, but I definitely don't regret having the surgery. And so my biggest recommendations is to do as much research as you can, prepare as best as you can, and just take the time to recover, because I think drinking the water and staying on top of your medication absolutely is important. But if you go back to work too early, or if you have kids that you're trying to take care of, it's going to be really difficult. So you need to make sure that you have a support system set up that you can focus on just you yourself. And actually, they will not let you have the surgery if you tell them that you're like going to be going back to work within a week. You actually have to sign a paper that says that you are not going to do that, because again, it is a surgery. And so it's hard to take that time off from work. 2 weeks is a lot of time, but it's 2 weeks for the rest of your life. And so I definitely recommend that if you were debating about getting your tonsils removed, that you do the research first, talk to your doctor, but I do recommend that you do it. It is worth it. It is painful, but it is something that is worth doing. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'm sure I forgot things that are probably obvious to you that are having your tonsils out pretty soon. For those of you that are having your surgeries or procedures, good luck. It will be worth it. There will be a light at the end of the tunnel. So let me know if you have any questions, if you want to share any of your stories down below. And thanks for watching. Bye.